think that market participants need to pay a lot of attention to what is happening in Taiwan. The messages coming from the Chinese government are unequivocal, and it's very dangerous to simply do what many market participants actually did when the Ukraine crisis started, which is to shrug it off and think that central bank policy is going to solve it all. The reality here is that it has very significant ramifications, not just on the geopolitical side, which is obviously going to get into a much more complicated situation, because in a certain way, the Taiwan tension is going to probably give China an excuse to further support Russia in Ukraine, but also because it will have ramifications into trade and certainly into the inflationary expectations that so many of us have been revising downwards in recent months. So it's an important element that should not be overlooked at all. And if I think of what we have seen in previous times, we usually see markets shrug off these geopolitical concerns and then suddenly react abruptly. So it's better to be prudent, look at what is really going on, and consider it within our cost of capital and economic estimates.
Regardless of the various Fed speakers pushing back last night on the market's current thinking that the Fed might not be as aggressive as originally thought, if there was, and God forbid, if there was an escalation in tensions, if not open military conflict between the US and China over Taiwan, and there was also, despite the Fed's independence supposedly from the market, a rapid rise in volatility, would that stay the Fed's hand or slow down its pace?
Well, it's a great question, because we have at least the precedent of geopolitical tensions making the Fed U-turn on its policy. And it was because of something that is significantly less problematic than the Taiwan crisis. God forbid, hope it doesn't happen, which was the decision to U-turn on rate hikes because of the trade war between China and the United States. Trade war, which, by the way, continues. So I think that we need to pay attention to what is going on geopolitically, because the Federal Reserve is not immune to what is going on globally. And in fact, in the FOMC meetings and in the different messages that members of the Federal Reserve have given in the last months, they have certainly talked about changes in the political environment globally and changes in the global economy. So obviously, tensions between the United States and China are going to generate some form of reaction from policymakers. We don't know which one it will be. I think that at least for now, the Federal Reserve is very confident that it has enough tools to continue with its rate hike path. However, we cannot think that they will continue to hike rates if tensions escalate to a grave level.
Yeah, interesting. We pop up a board of some of the safe haven trades here, Dan, and as I look at your notes this morning, you've got some interesting calls: gold, tech stocks and duration, and buy the dip on energy stocks. Just briefly walk us through those.
Why gold? Because gold is one of the very few decorrelated assets, and we need to have decorrelated assets in a portfolio. One of the things that we have learned from 2022 is that when markets correct, fixed income and equities go together. So gold at least stabilizes a portfolio and generates positive returns in environments of economic concerns, which I think is where we're going to. Also, after an inflationary spike like the one that we have seen, it is very likely that we will see easing of those inflationary pressures, and the valuations of technology stocks have become significantly more attractive. So the combination of at least the partial end or getting close to the end of Fed hiking, plus an improvement in earnings and the change in inflation expectations certainly are something that can help technology stocks. And energy. Why energy? Because if there's anything that we're getting from all of the political angles, from Europe, from what is going on in Taiwan right now, etc., it is that opening of trade, all of the things that have created disinflation in the energy sector are being wiped out. We're going back to nationalism, protectionism, resource scarcity, and lack of investment. So I would be at least looking at tips to participate in what looks to be a very, very tight energy market in the next 18 months.
I'd like to ask you about the jobs picture in the United States. Picking up on something that Loretta Mester said last night, where she said that it's a narrow path to not sparking a large rise in layoffs. We actually got some rather alarming numbers on the jobs front from the US, where the job openings fell. We saw manufacturing job openings falling, retail job openings falling, and the number of hirings falling for the 4th straight month. Is the idea that the labour market is still strong in the United States looking on shaky ground?
I think so. I think one of the problems that we face with labor market data in the United States is that it always shows a headline-grabbing, very robust image just prior to a contraction. And that's why I like to look at labor participation rate, employment to population rate, and real wages. And none of those three elements indicate the strength that the headline unemployment rate shows. But you've just mentioned also something that has been one of the cornerstones of consensus messages about the strength of the labor market came from job openings. And suddenly, for 4 consecutive months, we see that those are weakening, and weakening significantly, which shows that businesses in the United States are struggling because of inflation and because consumption is also relatively weaker than what they probably expected. So it's a double whammy. On top of that, the other element that I'm extremely concerned about, and that is at least telling us that something is not necessarily well in the US economy, is the investment figure. When I look at the GDP figure that was published last week and the complete slump in investment, that is telling us that the US business community is not seeing the same level of strength that they saw a few months ago, certainly a year and a half ago. So it's this perception that we're almost in the hangover of the stimulus plans, that there was this facade of strength created by monster government spending and huge debt that is now creating a boomerang effect. And that's certainly job openings, labor participation rate still extremely poor, employment to population rate also quite poor and significantly below the levels prior to the COVID crisis, and certainly real wages, because we talk about wage growth in nominal terms, but we forget that wages in real terms, excluding inflation, including the impact of inflation, are falling and falling dramatically.
There's no such thing as a free lunch, right? Those chickens come home to roost, to use multiple mixed metaphors. Danielle Lacalle, Chief Economist at Gestion, thank you very much for joining us today.